turns out we were the only ones who were right.
Yeah, I mean, a large part of me wants to say, I told you so.
Yeah.
I told you so.
Fucking vindication. How does it feel? Not that sweet, right?
Not this time, at least. No.
I mean, look, I don't think we can claim 100% sort of forecasting success. We didn't see the scale of the swing in each direction for the major parties, at least.
No.
And I don't think maybe some of the minor parties, as a consequence of that, did quite as well as we might have hoped or expected.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were worried that the outcome was going to be as such.
Yeah.
I personally thought Labor were probably going to get a majority, but I didn't realise it would be quite so severe as it has been. Yeah.
Yeah, and likewise, I mean, I think we didn't think it was necessary maybe to focus so much attention on, quote unquote, keeping Dutton out.
Yeah, well, I think that's where we were really right, and right for some time as well, that there was a misplaced focus on keeping Dutton out when he did a pretty good job of that all by himself, I would say. I don't think he needed much help.
Out.
Yeah.
And it turns out that the people who were boosting keeping Dutton out harder than anyone managed to get themselves kicked out to boot.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I think when your main campaign pitch is keep Dutton out, people hear that. Who are they going to vote for? They're going to vote for the guy who they associate with keeping Dutton out, who is his kind of immediate opponent. So, we're talking about the Greens, obviously. I do just think the Greens failed to differentiate themselves from Labor.
Who ran the worst campaign, the Libs or the Greens?
I mean, I think the Libs definitely ran the worst campaign. Although, I mean, there is a very interesting kind of parallelism there, right, with Bant and Dutton both.
I mean, look, Dutton had I think a 1.7% margin he was sitting on. Dixon was not exactly safe. Adam was on 49% primary.
Yeah.
This was before a redistribution, which I think knocked him down a few pegs. But certainly Melbourne swung harder than I think anyone would have expected.
Yeah.
And does say a fair bit about kind of, the strategies that got him there. Yeah.
I mean, they just didn't give people a reason to vote for them. They gave people reasons to vote for Labor, and they were so willing to say, we'll form government with Labor, that, it was hard to differentiate between the two. And I think that they just missed an opportunity there. Like they misperceived who their enemy was. Their enemy is the two major parties, which includes Peter Dutton, but it also includes Anthony Albanese.
And Albo was pretty clear about that. I mean, if you listen to him on election night, he was fairly glowing and gracious in commending Peter Dutton for the work that he'd done. He was absolutely brutal to the Greens. Like Albo might have said in his early days that he hates Tories. He fucking hates Greenies a whole lot more than them.
For sure.
He's under no impression who the enemy is, and it's not the other major party. It's the minor party trying to nip at their heels and take seats off them in the inner city.
Just kind of seething hostility coming from Labor towards the Greens.
And I mean that just means that the Greens basically cucked themselves. They effectively did the bidding and sucked up to the party who hates them more than anyone. And I mean, Advance and the Libs might outwardly kind of project animosity and real hostility to the Greens, but at the end of the day, they're not the ones the Greens are competing with. No. The Greens are never going to take Liberal seats off the Libs without the help of Labor.
No.
And we can come back to this. I think maybe we should talk about the kind of the two major parties and their divergent fortunes first. But I mean, they really slit their own throats.
Yeah.
They did themselves out of a job in a big way.
Yeah. And I mean, what I've heard from some people in the Greens is that was partially a response apparently to the Queensland election, where it was perceived that the Greens hadn't gone hard enough in positioning themselves against the LNP. And so that is partly why they went so far that way. And I mean, I've also heard Greens people say, well, it might have been worse if we hadn't done that. I just simply don't think that's true. I think that's a misreading of the mood, a misreading of the situation, of the actual risks that existed. Like the risk was always a majority Labor government rather than Peter Dutton.
And the risk in individual seats that the Greens have lost was always a 2CP against Labor, where the Libs were inevitably going to funnel all their preferences towards Labor. Like the Greens can't win in a runoff against Labor. The numbers don't add up. They don't add up in any of the Queensland seats. They don't add up in Melbourne either, where it ended up being a 2CP against Labor. But that's a seat that Adam won in 2010 and fought for sort of 4 elections after that against the Libs on the basis that you get Labor's preferences, and that's the only way the Greens can get over the line in seats like that.
Yeah.
So it just seems to me that they forgot. They took their eye off the real opponent. Yeah. And it's not a fucking, cartoon villain. It's the guy who absolutely dedicates his life towards knocking out the little guy. Yeah. Because he can.
Yeah.
When last we were here, we were talking about the fact that Dutton was basically done and the focus on stopping him was misplaced and a distraction. It turned out to be more than a distraction, potentially. But can we just do you think the last couple of weeks have given any further indications as to why he became toxic to the extent that he did? Because obviously it's a huge turnaround from kind of where we were at the start of the year or the start of the election campaign even.
Yeah. People are talking about the Trump factor, and I think that is a factor, kind of the ongoing outfall of the Trump presidency and the tariffs and the kind of chaos there, and people looking at that and saying, no thanks. Yeah. I think there was a fairly clear pivot there at one point where he moved away from aligning himself with Trump in any way. Jacinta Bryce then came in and,
torpedoed that fairly effectively.
Yeah. But I think that's definitely part of it.
The culture wars just don't work here in the way they do there, right? I don't know if they ever will, but they're not right now, and they're trying to play off against the sort of the inner city elites or the Canberra bubble or whatever. Just doesn't hit in the same way that it hits over there. We've, I think, probably canvassed this before, but the kind of the conspiracy, the paranoid tinge to politics does exist here, but just nothing like the kind of the efflorescence you get over there. Yeah. And so trying to tap into that with sort of like the, smashing the civil servants, ending working from home, trying to pitch to people who, work on the tools or work in the hospitals. It's just not landing.
No. And I think also the Libs and Dutton are not good at it either. I think there are others in Australia who are, Pauline Hanson, but One Nation I think have had a swing towards them this election, but they're not serious contenders.
Why? Just on that note, why do you think Clive made no impact at all? He obviously pissed a lot of people off.
I think he's kind of seen as a bit of a joke.
Well, he's just not serious. Is he? It is all a bit of a joke. Really.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that Jared Rennick seemed to tap into some of the people who maybe once upon a time would have been Clive Palmer people or even Pauline Hanson people.
Did I hear another podcast say that he got something like 5% across the country, which seems remarkable. Maybe that was sort of specific seats, but
I think he's just fresh. He hasn't had time to be kind of corrupted or had questions put over him like Pauline Hanson or Clive Palmer have. I think he's also kind of a fairly compelling and reasonable sounding guy. I'm not saying his beliefs are all reasonable, but the way he speaks kind of sounds fairly reasonable.
So what about the Liberal campaign itself as a campaign? Obviously there were some significant missteps, backflips, whatever early on, but the general tone or the way it was conducted.
Yeah. The policy stuff was few policies, backflips, incoherent, nuclear never really landed, etc. Then I guess in terms of style, I think that the kind of meme social media campaign failed pretty badly because it was just so transparent and so dumb. It was just pushed way too far, I think. And again, maybe that stuff works more in the US than it does here. Maybe.
We were talking, I think this was probably back during the WA election campaign, the AI slop stuff on nuclear and on others did seem to land at times, but there just didn't seem to be the cut through with the federal campaign. And I guess maybe that's because they'd also run away from nuclear so hard by that point, so they didn't have those key touchstone issues that they could hook sort of real shit posting around, I suppose.
And the nuclear thing is interesting because I do think that the rejection was of the coalition's nuclear plan rather than of nuclear energy. I don't think nuclear energy is popular in Australia, but I think, young people are more, polling shows that including in Australia, young people are more sympathetic towards nuclear being part of the mix than previous generations. I think that, it was more just the that plan itself and the way it was talked about and executed, it did just seem like fairly transparently, kind of trying to like play politics rather than come up with policy. And I mean, maybe to the credit of the Australian voters that they could see that.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk more about why, conversely, Labor did so well. We've talked about this before, but I'm still not persuaded or fully kind of, I don't see what was so successful and so effective in Labor's campaign that it translated into such a landslide. I mean, the nationwide swing, sure, wasn't massive. It was much more about everyone abandoning the Libs and the minor parties not picking up the change, except in a few specific seats. Yeah. But nonetheless, a lot of people have said that Labor ran a pretty perfect campaign. I mean, the right-wing press have said that. Labor themselves have been patting themselves on the back. I think you think that they've done a pretty good job in recent months. So tell me a bit about that, because I'm not seeing it I think
clearly. To some degree, it's a perfect campaign in the very contemporary sense of you don't fuck up or give yourself opportunities to fuck up. Like, I think that is one of the strengths, which is not particularly inspiring. I mean, as I think we talked about last time, I do think Albo personally has positioned himself fairly well through FM radio and podcasts and social media as this kind of reasonable, sensible figure in contrast to Peter Dutton. Obviously, that's fairly easy because Dutton's a freak. I mean, I think maybe it's just that they had such a good foil in terms of Peter Dutton. Like, I think that probably explains a lot of it. They identified that pretty early on. Like, I do think Labor seemed to get a read of the way things were going much earlier than everyone else, I would say.
And what did that lead them to campaign on? How did that play into what they were talking about and how they were talking about it?
I mean, I think, again, it was just them. It was kind of putting Albo front and centre and making him look normal and sensible.
Yeah.
And, the fear-mongering around Dutton, then they must have been stoked when the Greens jumped on that, I imagine. But, I mean, I don't think, like, there's anything visionary or inspiring or exciting about the campaigning. It was just a well-executed campaign in the kind of small target style that we're used to these days. Yeah. And that Labor have done, I feel like, two of them now fairly successfully. I mean, it's amazing, like, just to contrast it with The Voice, how badly they fucked up that campaign from the moment they brought Shaq in to kind of like talk about something that obviously had no idea about, and then the kind of arrogance that it seemed Albo had throughout. Like, they failed so utterly with that campaign. So it's pretty interesting that they can turn around and run the election campaign so differently, and maybe they learned some lessons there, or maybe it's just a different style of campaigning. I'm not sure, but
and one thing they didn't seem to rely on this time is the kind of the celebrity endorsement. I think they've kind of perhaps realised that doesn't do it anymore. Except maybe, I guess. Well, it's interesting because I feel like the Greens actually relied more on that through the kind of the podcast influences. Totally. Like the Abby Chatfield kind of thing was pretty heavy. If anything, Hannah Ferguson maybe was kind of like Labor's equivalent on that front, but she wasn't kind of in quite the same way, like attaching herself as a proxy for Albanese in the same way, although I think the intent and the effect was the same. But I feel like what Labor did really well was tread that middle path with new media in a way that the Libs failed to engage with effectively, and the Greens in some ways kind of like over capitalised on, I think.
The Greens made, I think, some of the exact same specific mistakes that Kamala Harris made, like to the degree that they had the Brat-styled Adam Bant T-shirts that said Bant. Like, surely after Kamala is Brat, you maybe think about that for half a second.
Well, and I mean, look, I've got to be honest. I'm going to claim this one for myself. The second that I saw DJ Bant on the decks, I wanted that whole thing to go away. Like that for me was never going to hit outside a specific cohort of fucking Gen Z inner city East Coasters. Basically, the people he needed maybe to convert to win his own seat. I mean, that didn't even end up playing out.
Yeah, I mean, that's fairly classic, and I do feel it is the same mistake that Kamala Harris made, is that you create stuff that appeals so intensely to those who are in your base and who are already super engaged, but leaves everyone else cold. Like, anyone who didn't already have some kind of attachment to Adam Bant as like a somewhat fun or, you know, figure worth following would look at that and think, yeah, cool. But
I'm also, as with Kamala, I'm just not buying it either. That isn't Adam for me. He says he's been DJing since he was in his 20s or whatever. Maybe he has. I don't know. I mean, he seemed to know vaguely what he was doing. But it didn't land. Like, he's a dorky 40 or 50 something guy. He wears fucking business shirts. He's been in Parliament for 15 years. It's just the authenticity gap compared to, say, Albo going on Batuta or fucking Aussie Man or whatever. Like, he was kind of able, surprisingly, to be more convincingly himself, I think, in those settings, by kind of like by restricting what he was giving, by not overplaying the hand effectively, by recognising his limitations, by recognising the limitations of his position and role and persona, and still managing to kind of like exploit the new media avenues without pissing too many people off by being cringe or lame or dumb or too woke or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I think he was a bit daggy, but that was kind of endearing. You know, he had that kind of dad factor. Yeah. Like, I'm sorry, but Adam Bant and Abby Chatfield on a stage singing Taylor Swift songs, like, you've got to be pretty fucking deep in the greens to not see that as like pretty cringe.
Liability.
Yeah.
And I mean, they just went back to her again, and like, I think with Abby specifically, they overcapitalized in quite an obvious way. They went back to her again and again and again, and I do think beyond a certain point, it does cross over into influencers being co-opted to an extent that just kind of starts to feel as fake as the way the old media can kind of like buy into political. Like, you start looking like the fucking Murdoch media or something beyond a certain point, I reckon.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's interesting. Like, I do think Chatfield probably did more for Albo than she did for the Greens. Right. I mean, again, she was running pretty hard on the biggest threat is Peter Dutton. We've got to stop American-style authoritarianism and fascism or whatever. Yeah. And I think probably I haven't looked at the numbers, but I'd say her interview with Albo probably went much further and wider than her interview with Bant. I mean, she's probably quite content with that. I think she's, at least from what she's posting, like, she seems happy with the outcome of the election. Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, maybe it was just what I was seeing. I was specifically seeing kind of the public appearances with Bant, the kind of the stuff inside Green's HQ where she was kind of, like literally sitting at his desk, etc., and actively spruiking them. Whereas with Albo, it felt more like a kind of a traditional mediator, interlocutor kind of arrangement, which I think works.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess that's maybe the point, is that actually probably works more for Albo than the kind of
the that coziness, the obvious endorsement.
Yeah, the campaigning, basically. She was, I mean, there were authorizations on those videos of her with Adam Bant, so she was campaigning. Yeah. So yeah, her as interlocutor probably works better than her as campaigner, I would say. Yeah.
And then Hannah Ferguson was obviously pretty pleased with herself as well, pretty happy with how that panned out. I think kind of, legitimately.
Yeah.
And I mean, the Libs didn't really seem to have any equivalents. That they kind of,
I mean, that Sam Fricker dude or whoever he was, the diver. But I just don't think. I mean, it's interesting in a way. Conversely to the American media ecosystem, there aren't really right-wing influencers operating to the same degree that the left-wings ones are. I mean, I did watch the SBS debate that they did between kind of 3 progressive influencers and the 3 conservative influencers, and like the 3 conservative influencers, Freya Leach was the only one I'd ever come across. Yeah. They were all paid by think tanks, and they were deeply embedded in the kind of traditional conservative infrastructure, and they just, I'm sure their combined audiences were nowhere near Punters Politics, Hannah Ferguson, Abby Chatfield. Yeah. So there is like, you struggle to think who could have that same degree of cut through. I guess, though, it would probably be someone who's actually not a political influencer. Like, I'm sure that there are people who exist who are out there who have big audiences who might be right-wing inclined, but then I don't think they're particularly excited about the Liberals either. They're kind of probably going down the Jared Rennick route or whatever. Yeah. True.
And just to cap this bit off, what about the mainstream media? any perspective on kind of how they did or didn't do?
I mean, this election campaign, more than any other in my adult life, I paid so little attention to the mainstream media. Yeah. I didn't watch any of the debates. I didn't even read the West most days or the Australian. Like, I've just felt like I was not actually getting my election news from the media. I mean, the Guardian live blog I was having a look at throughout the day, but I was tracking social media mainly. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, same, which is even more of a departure for me personally. I mean, I think two brief comments. Firstly, the Murdoch media / more relevantly in WA, the Seven West, Kerry Stokes operation just kind of consigned themselves to complete irrelevance. Stokes, I mean, literally the West tried to interfere in Curtin in a big way and got completely, like, they tried to run Cheney off the road effectively on the Northwest Shelf on other issues. She had a swing, a solid swing towards her. I just think it shows that even in the kind of conservative blue ribbon heartland of the western suburbs, no one fucking cares what Seven West is laying down. They're not engaged. They're not paying attention. I just think that at this point, if the WA government or the Albanese government are allowing themselves to be boxed in by the West, they're just jumping at shadows, effectively. There is no power there anymore. They do not have the ability to influence how the populace votes. And at some point, that has to that jump or connection has to be made by the politicians. That key link of the human centipede is kind of it's broken. The key aspect whereby the mainstream media can actually influence how people vote or how they engage with politics is gone. And so the influence politically ought to be kind of consequently lessened as well.
And surely they're close to that realisation. Like, surely.
I think so. I think so. And I think the way that they've campaigned, both the Cook government and the Albanese government in these two election campaigns, shows that. They have pivoted heavily towards social media. They've learnt the lessons from the US. And I think we're going to see that begin to play out. But they're irrelevant. Even down in Freo, they had a pretty good swing at Kate Hewlett at various times, and it didn't. They didn't land a glove.
Saw it.
They did not land a fucking glove. All it did was build a bit of background buzz, maybe.
Yeah, and I mean, I think in terms of Cheney, I actually think that the kind of scare campaign around her, which the West reporting was a part of and fed, was counterproductive. I think that those pamphlets with West headlines dropped in the mailboxes. People see through that shit now. Like, it just doesn't actually work. And if anything, it just, gives that bit of buzz and raises oxygen, the profile.
But doesn't actually cost you anything. Yeah, totally. And I think the other thing that the mainstream media has demonstrated is they are still completely preoccupied with the major party system, with red v blue. They cannot see past that. It was clear on election night. Even again, to focus in on Fremantle for a second, the fact that the ABC for a day and a half after the count had it still showing a 2CP split between Labor and Liberal, when that was just so clearly from the get-go not the story, and very hard to kind of, for days afterwards, the only story the media wanted to talk about, the ABC, Seven West, the Murdoch press, was Labor landslide, Liberal collapse, and there was so much more nuance around the edges that still you've got to kind of turn to alternative media to really get a read on. Yeah.
And do you think that's partly a lack of confidence? Like, surely they realise, like, say in Fremantle, that the real story is Hewlett versus Labor, but maybe to focus on that from the get-go might expose them or might kind of...
I mean, maybe. I think it's just their frame. I think their sources are largely the major parties. They believe what they're told. In Fremantle, for example, they believed the Labor Party when they said that Kate Hewlett would never be able to reach outside of the inner city and into the southern suburbs, even though that had been the narrative at the state election 2 months prior, and she'd managed to do it completely resoundingly. And again, I was telling them that the same thing was going to happen again at the federal election, but they were just accepting what they were fed, because that's the way it's always been. It's been a Labor seat for 94 years, and they can't conceive of an alternative to it. They could put Cheney and they could put the traditional Teals playing in Liberal seats in a frame that made sense, because they'd had that experience 3 and 6 years prior. But they don't have that adaptability.
No.
They're so conditioned. The fact that they're still fucking turning, and I'm going to go in on this guy, Martin Drum failed so catastrophically to understand what was happening at this election that this guy should not ever feature in another ABC story about electoral politics again. Sure, he's the only fucking political science professor in the entire state, he does not understand how politics works in 2025. Stop talking to Martin Drum. Come and talk to us.
Yeah.
You've got to get off this Kool-Aid.
You may as well actually just go to the average person sitting in the cafe down the road.
Please do.
Yeah.
Please go and
have about as much insight.
Please go and do an actual fucking vox pop.
Yeah.
Novelty mic or not. The guy in the fucking political science department at the university has less than zero idea what is happening outside the fucking...
But they'll keep going to him. He's in the Rolodex. He's kind of, it's like, oh, Freo election expert. Oh, this guy.
It's crazy. It's crazy. So, yeah, Martin, apologies. The debate was dull and your fucking... Your commentary around it was just so far from the mark that it's time to hang up the hat. Like, give it up and... Give it over to some people who actually have some connection with what's happening in the suburbs and on the streets, because I think that the mainstream media, by virtue, and that's the relevant kind of broader issue, is the dynamic whereby they're still talking to the same fucking list of experts they've been talking to for the last 10, 20, 50 years.
Yeah.
And they're out of touch. They don't know what's happening. They can't make sense of the New World Order because they're all fucking boomers.
Yeah.
And they're the ones who still, in this ever-shrinking ecosystem and kingdom of mainstream media, legacy monopoly, they're the ones who still have the platform. And in the real world, no one knows they exist. And thus the connection is basically severed again.
Yeah.
So it's time they woke up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Shall we finish by going back in on the Greens and talking a bit more about kind of what happened there?
I mean, I think there's more to say. I mean, I'm interested in some of there's plenty of narratives floating around about why the Greens lost. I mean, one of them is that they were deemed as obstructionist and that they've been punished for that, which I think is a bad take.
Very wrong.
Tell us why.
Because it's quite the opposite.
Yeah.
They weren't punished for going too hard, for being too staunch. They were punished for cucking themselves and for not backing their own convictions.
Rather than what they did in their term around housing and whatnot. Yeah, I think that is a misread for sure.
It's a total misread. They were not staunch enough. Adam Bant ran his office in a way that was, contrary to how it's been presented, actually quite milquetoast and cautious and conservative. There were messages coming out of the leader's office. I've been told that they weren't allowed to talk about Gaza, for example. It was too divisive. They didn't want to speak about that. And I think, the sense that, they went in too hard on Gaza as an issue is again misplaced.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely wrong. Yeah.
And likewise, across the board, they picked the wrong side. They picked the wrong battle. They misread the public mood and went all in on what was ultimately a cautious and conservative strategy of prioritising stopping Dutton over keeping Labor honest and making sure that there was actually some pressure to ensure that Labor just weren't fucking Liberal light for a second term in succession. Yeah. And I think that it is still the case that people want political power and they respond to strength. They weren't getting it from Dutton, who showed himself to be a strong man in name only. They were getting some degree of stability and reliability from Albo and went for that as the default.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you can split it many ways, but I just think that ultimately the Greens got the numbers wrong.
Yeah. 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 And I mean, I think just coming back to Freo briefly as well, the fact that the Hewlett Independent campaign did do so well and did seriously challenge Labor and took Labor on at every opportunity and focused on that as the opposition shows that it can be done in a progressive seat.
Yeah.
Like the Greens could have been doing a lot of what I think was being done there and doing it quite successfully.
Yeah. And I mean, there was another example in Bean in the ACT, also down in Franklin in Tasmania, where Peter George got a 26% primary and had he not had Liberal preferences flowing to Labor instead of to him, probably would have got pretty close as well. So in the 3 seats, in other words, around the country where independents ran hard against Labor from the progressive end of politics on the kind of the big issues on climate, environment, on housing, they all did very well and put up a serious challenge that spooked the hell out of Labor and will have a lasting political impact going into this next term. Whereas the Greens basically blew out.
Yeah.
And I mean, there was a line I saw from Sarah Hanson-Young during the week responding to Adam Bant losing his seat where she said they were grieving what feels like the most unfair of outcomes. It's not fucking unfair. It's the logical consequence. It's the ultimate end of that whole strategy. They got it completely ass around. They had, a two-pronged strategy in terms of their messaging and their focus. The first of which was targeting the Liberals and stopping them, and the second of which was making Labor actually do something to differentiate themselves. But all of the energy went on that first bit, keeping Dutton out long after that was relevant or necessary or useful.
And also even just on the level of language, like make Labor act. Like, what does that mean? It's the most vague statement in the world. Yeah. And it's like, well, they've succeeded. Labor can now act to do whatever the hell they want. Yeah.
And just to go in on the maths of this. So the Greens had 4 lower house seats at the start of the election. They've now got 1.
Yeah.
They've kept, I forget if it's Ryan or Brisbane. I think it might be Brisbane itself. Anyway, it's one of the 3 Brisbane seats, but they've lost Griffith, they've lost the second Brisbane seat, and they've lost Melbourne as well.
Yeah.
All of those Queensland seats were won in 2022 on a 2CP runoff against the Libs.
Yeah.
Because what happens there is that the Greens get enough primary vote to get above Labor, and then all of Labor's preferences flow to them, and that puts them over the top against the Libs. Now, that's how they have always won their lower house seats. There's not a single lower house seat that they have won off Labor directly. Max Chandler-Mather beat Terry Butler, but only because the Lib primary was higher than the Labor primary. And so, again, all of Terry's preferences flowed her way. Yeah. What they've done this time in those seats is they've depressed the Liberal primary to such an extent. Labor has benefited from that on primary vote to some extent, but then they benefit entirely from getting over the top of Labor and getting over the top of the Libs and picking up all their preferences. And then the Greens just stand no chance at all. They cannot compete against both major parties combined. Yeah. And that's effectively what they've done by going in so hard on the Libs. Yeah. They've just pushed everyone towards the middle ground.
Yeah.
And again in Melbourne, Adam had a nominal 6% swing after redistribution, but effectively a 9% swing from 49% primary, one of the safest fucking seats in the country, to just 40%. And again, the Lib preferences all flow straight to Labor. And it's a lose-lose strategy. Even in some independent seats like in Fremantle, I would argue, and will argue in greater detail at a later date, that the Greens' strategy more broadly of messaging against Dutton has knocked out kind of all the progressive candidates because it's just pushed the Liberal primary down so far. Some of that flows directly to Labor. All of it flows ultimately to Labor. And they've destroyed, the Green left has destroyed itself, basically. Yeah. Sure, they've still got 11 Senate seats. Maybe that'll count for something. We'll see.
Yeah.
But I just think it was a real miscalculation.
I mean, one thing that strikes me as kind of remarkable is that the federal parliament is now looking a lot like the WA parliament, right? You've got this big Labor majority. You've got the Libs have fallen in a heap.
Yeah.
You've got Greens with balance of power in the upper house, which they can use if they get the opportunity to.
I mean, one would think, ironically, that on climate and environment issues, there'll be very little cause for Labor to actually need the Greens to get stuff over the line because based on the example of the previous term of government, both state and federally, they're much closer to the Libs and tend to just gang up with them on fossil fuels, on nature laws, on all that stuff. So maybe on issues like housing, the Greens can still have influence both at a state and federal level.
Yeah. And I guess another thing here is that some people are quite optimistic, I suppose, that Labor is kind of going to use its majority and step into being the progressive party that it really wants to be, and that this is now an opportunity for Albo to show some leadership and whatnot. I mean, I got to say, I'm not optimistic. And I also just wonder, like, what is the mandate that Labor have now from this result, or what are they going to see as their mandate? Because I don't think it's going to be to do that. Like the rejection of the Greens, I think, has kind of meant that the way they've been operating has been vindicated, and I'd be pretty surprised if they did anything else.
It's a victory for centrism.
Yeah.
It's being perceived as a victory for centrism.
Yeah.
And it's very plausible to argue that.
Yeah.
It really is.
And I mean, I guess that does make me wonder what will happen next time, because I think another important thing here is that, again, the combined major party vote has fallen. So there are more people voting for independents and minor parties than ever before, even if that's not reflected in the makeup of the parliament. I just wonder if in 3 years' time, if Labor continues the way it has been, there'll be plenty of people who are disappointed. Like, will some of the same kind of wrath that's been directed at Dutton then be directed to Albanese? Like, I guess, is this just a kind of a mirage in the ongoing decline of the two major parties, and it just so happens that this time one side has just completely fucking fallen off a cliff?
Yeah, I think that feels accurate to me. That feels like a read on where things are heading. The thing that we need to remember as well is that Labor failed during their first term. They came in with a climate mandate. They came in with an environment mandate. They came in with a housing mandate. They failed to deliver on all those.
Tried to deliver the three planks of the Uluru Statement from the Heart.
Yeah. They did not deliver on any of their mandate. They broke their promises, and the audience for that, the electorate for that, failed to punish them for it because they weren't given a national alternative. In the specific seats where they were given a real alternative to Labor's failures, they responded in a big way, in Fremantle, in Bean, in Franklin. Elsewhere, the focus was bizarrely put upon the Libs as pariah. All of the energy was taken out of keeping the heat on Labor over their manifold failures, which, you know, the Greens had been pointing out for most of the prior 3 years, and then as soon as it came to the crunch, just took the foot off the throat. And so, yeah, I mean, Albo has got away with this one massively, has secured a huge victory, but I'm not convinced that we won't see a lot more of the kind of independent campaigns that do actually provide a genuine, proactive, fairly aggressive alternative to the major parties' failings. And in this case, it's been the Labor Party that's failed. I mean, the Libs have failed by default. They've just sort of fallen away completely. They've ceased to exist in a meaningful sense as an opposition. But yeah, I don't think this is any kind of like sea change reversion to to status quo centrism so much as just no one really provided an alternative.
Yeah. I mean, as a friend of ours has been saying, the independents are now the real opposition, right? Which is, I mean, it is a bizarre situation we're in, where the seats in the country that have representatives who are the most ambitious on climate are these like classic blue ribbon Liberal seats like Curtin and whatnot. Like, that is a bizarre situation that we're in.
And it shows also, I do think it shows to some extent, if there's anything that can be that progressives can take heart from in what is otherwise a fairly depressing and banal electoral landscape, is the fact that action on these core tenets of progressive politics are no longer really bipartisan in terms of electoral outcomes. As you say, you can campaign on gas, you can campaign on AUKUS, you can campaign on environmental issues and get a strong response if you speak about it in a way that people actually fucking respond to.
Yeah.
And if you confront the real devil in the detail, which is the nature of our political system as a whole. It's not about whether it's fucking Dutton as bogeyman or Albo as kind of safe pair of hands. It's just confronting the status quo as systemically unable to react to the reality of the crisis we find ourselves in. And I think when you confront that and grapple with it and present that to people, they fucking vote for it.
Yeah.
So hopefully lessons can be learned.
Yeah. Do you reckon we'll see a lot more Teals or community independents in Labor seats next time around?
Oh, of course. Without question.
Yeah.
And a bunch of them will win, I suspect.
Yeah. Yeah. And would you rather, I mean, Albo's a DJ too, DJ Albo or DJ Bant? Who would you rather go and...
I mean, DJ John Howard, I reckon, for me, like a mad cunt any day of the week. Yeah, I'm not particularly enamoured of any of the modern alternatives. I reckon stick with the classics, the deep cuts.
Yeah, good call.
Yeah. All right.
Anything else?
Nah, it's fine.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Cheers.
Take it easy.